Back to My Garden, episode 17.
Welcome to Back to My Garden. Discover your passion for gardening. Here's Dave Ledoux.
What's the secret weapon of top-level gardeners? It's Haven brand Moo Poo Tea. What? I'm serious as an onion. Have your greatest garden ever. Check it out at www.backtomygarden.com/moo. This episode of Back to My Garden sponsored by Coffee Royalty. Can you really lose 5, 10, even 20 pounds or more just by switching your coffee or tea? Find out how to drink it for free at www.backtomygarden.com/coffee. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world when you listen to this. Welcome to another edition of Back to My Garden. I'm your host, Dave Ledoux, and today, if you can picture a map of North America in your head, go all the way to the Pacific Northwest. Our guest is from Western Washington, though she's got gardening experience all over the world, including England. She has a deep love for all things homemade. Tremendous blogger. She has a blog for those people who love to tinker, dig, bake, and do. She's got 7 years of nursery and gardening experience, as well as being a garden ninja for hire since her teenage years. And she asks the question, what does your garden say about you? So we have a lot to cover today. I want to welcome to the call Erin Meier. Erin, welcome to the call.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Yeah, it's bright and early for you on the West Coast.
Oh, it is, but I'm a morning person and apparently a garden ninja. I think I'm going to have to put that on my business cards for sure.
Absolutely. I want to get to know you a little bit, and I'm sure the listeners want to get to know you. Take a minute or two, Erin. Just share with us a little bit about your background.
Well, I grew up on a small town, in a small town on the Olympic Peninsula. Very beautiful. People come from all over the world to see the national park out there. I come from a big family. My dad's a gardener. My grandma Macaulay, she was a big gardener. And, you know, in high school, it just seemed like more fun to start gardening for people rather than babysitting. So I did, even though I love kids. And I did that through high school while I was attending the University of Washington in Seattle. And it just really sort of became a vocation for me. Although I was actually studying English, I tried and various internships. I taught at a private school for a couple of years. I did an internship in marketing, and I just kept coming back to horticulture. I love plants. I love having my hands in the dirt, and I really love the community among gardeners. I think that's probably one of my favorite things about being a gardener.
Dynamite. I love how photographic strong your blog and Twitter feed are. For those of you driving, keep both hands on the wheel. I'll put links to Erin's social media on the site. But if you're following along, Erin can be reached on Twitter at @BBBurrow. That's B as in basket. BBBurrow. Her blog is www.blackberryburrow.com. Phenomenal blog. And Erin, talk about the early days, because some people come to gardening as adults and some people come to gardening as a kid. And what was it like working for somebody when you're a teenager? What did you learn? What did you experience?
Well, you know, it was a lot of fun. And I have to say, I recently had quite a chuckle because I interviewed my own father about his garden and his early years gardening. And he said he started gardening when his father forced him to weed the rock garden. And I thought that was really funny because my story of gardening starts with I hated weeding when I was a kid. I'm pretty sure my dad had 5 kids so that he could have people to weed his garden. And as I got older, that actually grew into a love of gardening. I had my own garden when I was 14 years old. My father gave me a little plot of land, and my grandma lent me some bulbs and some plants, and before I knew it, I had a great big garden. And my sister actually was mowing someone's lawn for them, and she graduated and left, and I started to take on I believe, gosh, it was so long ago. I think I took on that job. And then someone at my church heard that I was gardening for someone. And, from there, it just blossomed out. It was a lot of fun. My customers would give me tea and cookies. And I think working in someone's garden, you really get to know them in a way that really not very many people do. Because, as you probably know, gardens are very personal.
Say more about that. I mean, after all, I guess you get to see a lot, understand people's psychology almost. It's almost like being a therapist.
It really is in a way. I mean, I had this one customer, Lejeune Whitney. She had an entire hillside of roses up on Bell Hill above Sequim, Washington. And she would sit on a bucket and prune, and I would walk around and prune the roses. And I knew the basics of pruning roses from my father, but of course you always listen to other people more than you do your own parents. So from Lejeune, I learned how to prune roses. And, she was an amazing woman. She was one of the original executives for Hewlett-Packard. And she just had some great stories. And I feel like I learned a lot from her about what it means to be a woman in the business world, what it means to strike out and forge new territory. So a lot of my customers actually became a huge inspiration to me and were a huge influence on me in my high school and college years.
Wow, that's strong. My friends keep going like, Dave, what's this new disease you got, this gardening madness? I say, no, this is a deep, complex world with many people in it, and it's a personal development environment.
It really is. I don't know what you find, but I often feel that, when I'm away from my garden for too long, I get a little bit like itchy for that sort of contemplative Zen space, where it's just you and the soil and you're just, sort of with nature.
A lot of our listeners are in big cities, living in apartments, and their gardens are containers on their patio or even on their windowsill. Mm-hmm. I know you've got a lot of variety and experience. Can you talk a little bit about your time over in the UK and contrast it? Because you're in the Pacific Northwest. What's the same and what's very different?
So I was living in a town called Norwich. I was attending the University of East Anglia. And, the climate was colder than what I was used to, a bit colder in the winter, and it was a little drier. But other than that, there were definitely similarities. I got to work in a lovely couple's garden. I sort of advertised in the paper and got that job as sort of a foil to all the studying I was doing in the library. And, everything grew there. I mean, the climate's very similar to Western Washington. Of course, you have to deal with, if there's too much moisture, the plants that really love heat and dry, like tomatoes, don't do so well. But then you have, the most beautiful, huge peonies and delphiniums and things like that just really thrive with the rain.
Let's talk about that. We have listeners from Texas, California, Arizona. It's up ridiculous temperatures. They're drier than dust. And there you are, in Washington. You're getting your fair share of rain. But that comes with its own challenges. Can you speak a little bit about the challenges that you find gardening in that kind of a climate?
Yeah, definitely. There are a few things. Take a few plants, for example. When you're growing something like a dahlia, what we have here in my area of Western Washington is we have extremely wet winters and springs and often kind of a drought almost in the summer. It's fairly dry, of course, not compared to Texas, but fairly dry. And so you sort of have these extremes. And dahlias, oftentimes people would dig them up and not leave them in the ground because the tubers will rot. And things like echinacea or salvia, what actually kills them here is not the cold, but the wet. I actually learned that from one of the wholesale growers. Little tips I got while receiving plants working down at the nursery I worked at in Seattle. And then, you look at things like edibles and, the onions. You really have to make sure you plant them high and dry, somewhere they have good drainage. Your root crops, with vegetables, you really sort of have to be conscious of amending the soil to the point where most vegetables you're growing are going to want that good drainage. And then in the summer, you kind of, even though you think like, oh, it's been raining a lot and everything's going to be fine, you really do have to keep an eye on the watering. And with the tomatoes, it's really tricky. I mean, not too tricky, but the thing that they always say is keep the water off the leaves, because the tomatoes here are really susceptible to blight. And so we actually tend to prune our tomatoes up 12 inches from the ground. And we make sure that we water at the base, whether it's with soaker hoses or, just a little sprinkler head. We do a lot of sort of adjustments and tweaks to deal with that sort of wet winter, spring, dry summer effect.
Fantastic. I've never heard that. You clean the feet up a little bit by the sounds of it. And
we do. So basically the old thing, I hear from all the old gardeners and the practice people still follow is we keep it pruned about 12 inches from the ground. If the leaves touch the ground, they tend to get the blight out of the soil. And so you've got to do that. You keep the water off the leaves. Oftentimes a lot of people I know will prune their tomatoes fairly heavily to make sure there's a lot of air circulation. Because for us, it's really a race against time. You almost don't want to put your tomatoes in the ground until early June. The old rule of thumb is Mother's Day here, but really I and a lot of my gardening friends have found more success by waiting till the soil is actually warm. And then it's a race against time until the cool of the autumn to get some nice, healthy tomatoes. And most of us gardeners here have learned, unless you have a greenhouse, you really want to be growing a cherry tomato or a salad-sized tomato. The big beefsteak tomatoes, again, unless you have a greenhouse, really don't ripen very well out here. We just don't get enough sun.
You don't have enough sun? Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm learning stuff. We've been eating tomatoes now, I'd say about 9 days, and only one kind.
Nice.
And so I go in, and my wife's 15, 16 years of doing these heirloom tomatoes. And this one kind is from Siberia.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, it's winter 9 months of the year there. Mm-hmm. And they've got this kind of tomato. It's the first one of the season, and it ripens first. And the science is what I fell in love with is, soil testing.
Oh, it's fascinating. It's really interesting. I took I'm still at the intern stage, but I took a Master Gardener's course this last winter. And the class on soil science, I have to say, it sounds boring maybe to some people, but that was my favorite class of each class it was only a 10-week course, and each class kind of has a different topic. Boy, the soil science was fascinating.
My wife is going to university in the fall to do Master Gardening course, and I say, oh, I'm dating a college woman. And how did you find it? How was the workload? Was it gratifying? Too much? What was your takeaway?
I really enjoyed it. So it's a 10-week course. Each of the classes covers something like soil science, or, fruits and vegetables, or plant pathogens. So what it is, it's really a class where they sort of introduce you to each of these topics and resources for learning more. And so it is a lot of information all at once, especially for someone like me who I studied English at university. I really had no intention necessarily of going into horticulture. But the information could be overwhelming at times. Me and my classmates definitely felt like our brains were being crammed, but it was a really exciting process. And of course you meet other people in your class who are also really interested in gardening. And then at the end, you get to participate in those plant clinics, which is just like being a plant detective. You feel like Sherlock Holmes. People bring in their plants. They have diseases, or maybe something's not growing or thriving for one reason or the other, and you get to try to figure it out. It's a lot of fun.
In gardening, you can be book smart, or you can learn from teachers and the traditional old-timers. Sounds like you have both.
It's funny. I was thinking of the term, one of my friends, I used to work at a place called City People's Garden Store down in Seattle for about 5 years. And my coworker, Jose, often said that he was self-taught. And I was thinking about how I would describe sort of my how I learned how to garden, really. And I would say sort of, I guess the best term I can think of is it takes a village, because I've really learned from all the nursery customers over the years, people I gardened with and worked for, my fellow community gardeners, my dad, and like I said, my grandma and Collier were very passionate gardeners. So really you just, you pick things up here and there, you try things. And I agree with you, Dave, the scientific aspect of it, it's sort of like your own mad scientist little nature laboratory. So it's pretty exciting at times.
I wanted to ask you, Erin, you and I both have friends who are gardeners in England where they have the allotment and plots. Mm-hmm. And then my friend Chelly is in Los Angeles, and she went down to the community plot to get on the list. She was number 700 and something. In my little town, there's a waiting list for community plots. So somebody's falling in love with gardening. What's the scene like where you live?
Oh, it's definitely, this is a gardening state for sure. Our Northwest Flower and Garden show that happens in Seattle, and they're actually on Twitter, and they have some fantastic, they have a fantastic feed, which is really fun to follow. But the Northwest Flower and Garden show takes place in February. People come from miles around. It's a lot of fun, amazing gardens. And then, the Seattle Pea Patch program has been around, it's terrible, I don't remember, but I think it was one of the very first community garden programs in the United States. And it's actually named after the family who started the program by donating some land to the Pea Patch program. And yeah, there's a waiting list. We were lucky to get our first gardening plot. We had moved to Ballard. I actually just started volunteering at the Pea Patch because they do have a program where you can volunteer to help with growing food for the food bank. And I started volunteering there, and then Mark said, Erin, you should just get a patch here. And I was like, okay. So I signed up, and it actually didn't take that long. However, we noticed a year after we signed up that it started to become a 2-year waiting list. So yeah, it's definitely, the waiting list has grown over the last 10 years or so a lot, I'd say.
We used to worry about growing too many zucchinis because, September comes and what do you do with all the zucchinis? And Shauna Coronado, who's a gardening writer, told me about Plant a Row for the Hungry. And a lady in my town here donated 50 tomato plants this spring just for the food bank, just to grow tomatoes for our local food bank. So that social consciousness and that helping others mission, I find gardeners are really generous people.
Well, and I just think it's wonderful because, canned food is all very well, but when you're trying to feed your kids and you're having a hard time making ends meet, it's just, I think it's wonderful to have that resource of gardeners growing for the food bank where you have things like fresh bok choy, fresh tomatoes like your friend donated, and you can really, make a meal for your family that's beautiful to look at and also healthy for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to expand our garden next year and do it just to feed hungry people. I think it's a noble cause. I want to ask you, Erin, about your garden this season. What's your garden like this year?
Well, so this is, we recently moved to Bellingham, and this is my second year growing at this community garden. It's down in Happy Valley near Fairhaven. I am having a lot of fun with my garden this year. I've got 5 different tomatoes growing. One of them, the green zebra tomato, which was actually bred by Tom Wagner out of Everett. So that's exciting. I think I mentioned to you earlier that I was very excited about my pie garden, which had rhubarb, strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries in it. I was very excited about it. Unfortunately, I did learn that there are deer in Bellingham, and despite my deer fence, they did decide to graze on my pie garden, so I probably won't have as many berries as I had hoped for this year.
You had an attack by some garden raiders.
I called it the deer-pocalypse.
The deer-pocalypse. I love that idea of a pie garden as a concept.
I think that I was working down at the garden spot last year over near Trader Joe's, and my coworker Deb or someone had coined that term. And I think since then I had heard that term from her, and since then I've seen like little things online where people were planting like gardens specifically for their pie baking, and it made so much sense to me because I love to bake pies. I've been baking pies since high school. I'm actually a grandmother in a 34-year-old's body. And so, yeah, I thought it would be fun to, kind of have my own sort of pie garden to feed my pie baking craze.
What a coincidence. I happen to be a pie eater, and I absolutely love it. My wife, though, is gluten-free now and has tremendous health benefits, but that meant no pies until recently. We have found a pie baker locally whose daughter has celiac, and he has spent years perfecting his pie crust. And I'm embarrassed to say I ate half a gluten-free cherry pie the other day.
Oh, don't be embarrassed. Cherry
one sitting all by myself.
Oh, well, if you've been deprived of pie for a while, that's understandable. Actually, gluten-free baking is it's on the rise. In Seattle and Bellingham, there are quite a few bakeries that make fantastic gluten-free concoctions. And I have some friends who are gluten-free. I've successfully baked a Victorian sponge cake that was gluten-free. I'll have to try my hand at pie. I've never attempted a gluten-free pie crust. Do you know what they used in the ingredients? Almond flour, perhaps?
Perhaps. I do not know. My wife would know, and she's going to do the transcript of this, and I'll get her to dig up a recipe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always fun to experiment in new mediums. And it's funny. I definitely have some friends that, they feel so much healthier on a gluten-free diet. A couple of them sort of had to, and a couple of them chose to, but it's really made a difference for them. So it's nice to be able to support them in their health choices.
Invariably, this becomes part of my regular conversation because we need to start as a society thinking about where our food comes from.
Absolutely.
When I was a kid, I was a kid in the late 70s, early 80s. In my whole school, there was only 2 kids with asthma, maybe 2 or 3 overweight kids, and there was no such thing as peanut allergies. Mm-hmm. So in 20 years, now kids can't even take peanut butter to school. There's letters of protection. They can't. Where did all this asthma and allergies in kids come from?
Well, you make a point there. I mean, and then right now, I think about things like we're having warmer summers in Western Washington than we've ever had before. And you just think about what sort of impact not only is pollution having on our climate, but what is it having on us? I mean, yeah, even from the 80s on, I was a child of the 80s, and I don't remember a lot of allergies or things, probably more than the 70s. But now it's just, my sister's kids, I know that there's so many problems that little kids are struggling with, and it's just really hard to see because they're so young.
You garden both sides, the flower love and the edibles. In your garden this year, what are you most proud of, and what is frustrating the heck out of you?
Oh, I love these kind of conversations. This is fun for me. I want to start with what is frustrating me because my family just laughs at me because they, most of them do garden. I cannot grow a radish to save my life, Dave. I cannot grow radishes. It doesn't matter what I do, what chips I try. I still have yet to grow a successful radish. That said, I grow carrots and beets and onions and many things successfully. I would say probably what I'm most excited about right now that we're harvesting is our Walla Walla sweet onions. They got really big this year, and the flavor is just incredible. And of course, those were, I think, bred over in Eastern Washington originally, so it's kind of fun. And they were a favorite of my grandfather. So probably, the radishes, I think it shows what a garden nerd I am, that I'm just fascinated by my inability to grow radishes. I get the sort of pithy, hollow interior. I've tried watering it differently. I've tried, planting them at different times. But if any of your listeners have suggestions, please stop by my blog and give me suggestions. I am always happy to learn, and I would love to. I'm going to try another radish crop again for the fall. We'll see what happens.
All right, all you radish enthusiasts out there, either Twitter Erin at @bbburrow and leave a comment on her blog at www.blackberryburrow.com. Last year we grew German radishes, and they were the size of small berried pumpkins.
Oh, that sounds... And I love to eat radishes. They're delicious. How were the German radishes?
Not a fan.
Really interesting.
But this year, Thalia went to rareseeds.com and she ordered watermelon radishes. And they come out white. They look like an ugly parsnip, and you cut them open and they're pink inside.
I've seen the seeds for those. I think I saw them on the Renee's Garden rack once. I hope that you'll post some pictures when you guys harvest those, because they sound beautiful.
Well, I have a photo on Twitter that I put up recently that everyone's laughing at because it's possibly the ugliest vegetable I've ever pulled out of the ground. I think we left it in far too long, and my wife caught me making a face, and then she put it up on Twitter.
Oh, I love it.
But the flavor. I'm an evangelist now for watermelon radishes, chopped up really fine in the salad. Phenomenal.
Okay, good to know. Maybe I will. I usually grow the French breakfast radishes, the elongated ones. I really love those, but I will buy some watermelon radish seeds.
Cool. I'm going to get the guys from rareseeds.com on the show because they have fun. Like, my wife was on last night, and it's like, I don't know, when I was a kid, there was this thing that came in the mail a month before Christmas called the Christmas Wish Book. And it was right at the end, before, no internet, there's only 4 or 5 TV channels. And as kids, we would lay at this Christmas Wish Book and look through the catalog at toys that were coming out a month from now. My wife has the same glee and excitement looking through their online catalog of seeds from around the world.
I totally understand that. In fact, I think I said over Twitter or something once, I said, you're a gardener when you get more excited about the seed catalogs than Christmas.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, our half hour is rapidly getting away from us, and now is the time in the show when we play the game called 5 Quick Questions.
Yay!
This is your chance to drop your wisdom and experience on the listeners. Are you ready to play?
I'm ready to play for what it's worth.
Question number 1. In your opinion, what do you think stops most people from gardening?
I think people try to do too much at once. I think they get overwhelmed. And what I would usually say to customers who came in, they just bought a house or they were starting a new garden, I usually said to them, don't buy more plants than you can plant in one day. Start slow, start with one part of your yard and work out from there. I think new gardeners tend to beat themselves up a lot. So I think a lot of it's psychological. And once you get the experience of gardening, you realize you're going to lose some plants and sometimes you can't get to your garden for a few weeks, but that's okay. And so I think just learning to, roll with the punches is a good way to sort of keep yourself in the gardening game.
That's awesome advice, Erin. My friend Richard over in the UK is nodding in agreement with you. He got his allotment plot. It was 4,000 square feet of bush.
Wow.
And everyone said, start small, your back will thank you.
Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Number 2, you've gardened for yourself, for other people. You've got over a decade of experience. What is the best gardening advice that you've ever received?
It actually sort of relates to what I said earlier, but I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Bill Thornes. I met him through the Ballard Pea Patch. He was always there with some sort of sage gardening advice. He actually has a book that he wrote called Edible Heirlooms. So if you're interested in heirlooms, Dave, you should definitely check this book out. The illustrations are beautiful. I think it's published by Timber Press. And what Bill said to me was actually an old quote that you probably heard before, but he said, "The best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow."
Whoa, drop in philosophy here. Let me write this down.
Right? The best fertilizer is the gardener's shadow. And what it made me realize is that every time I go out to my little community garden patch, I don't need to spend 4 hours there breaking my back and then not go again for another week and a half. But if I go for half an hour here and there over the course of a week, I learn that my garden will thrive, and keeping an eye on it and spending time with it. And even if it's just, taking a bottle of wine and hanging out with my garden and seeing what might be happening with my plants, my gardens have been much more, much happier since then.
Nice. Question 3. This is for the beginners out there. Erin, if you had just 2 websites to share with a beginner gardener, what would those websites be?
Well, obviously BackToMyGarden. No.
Yeah, other than our 2 wonderful blogs.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
I really like, it's a commercial blog, but I really like the Territorial Seeds website, especially being a Northwest gardener. They have little grow guides on their website that are specific to the Northwest. And so if you are a Northwest gardener and you're dealing with the rain and the clay soil and the acidity, they have really great advice for how to amend your soil and how to sort of grow things successfully in the Northwest.
And that website would be?
Territorialseeds.com, I'm pretty sure.
Awesome. I'll look that up. Good.
Yeah, the guy that originally started it, Steve Solomon, he wrote a book that's sort of the gardening Bible around here. It's called Gardening West of the Cascades. And it was really the first book that sort of looked at the Northwest and said, oh, wow, we need to garden differently. Things that work on the East Coast are really not going to work out here. So that was an inspiration to a lot of people. And then, I'm actually having a lot of fun. Do you know Bryn Haas? I think her Twitter handle is @BGGarden.
I do. I follow her on Twitter.
Right. I have a lot of fun with her blog. I think if you're a gardener, if you're a new gardener, it really can inspire you. She has a lot of fun little videos or little trips she took, and saw beautiful gardens. And so that's another blog that I think would be really inspiring and fun for a new gardener.
I'll put Bryn's URL and.
Oh, it's here. Sorry. I hope that I just realized the clicking noise might translate, but it's bggarden.com/blog.
bggarden.com/blog. In case anyone's driving and want to type that into their onboard iPad in their car right in there. Right. Well, actually, we're going off topic, but Stitcher just did a deal with Ford, and there's going to be podcasts next year in every Ford in the radio dash of your car.
Oh, that's fun.
And people saying, why do I want to listen to music I don't like when I can listen to podcasts on topics that I enjoy?
Right? I download podcasts all the time onto my little listening device, and I take them up with me on walks or on bike rides. It's the best thing ever. It's been really great to see all this independent radio that's flourished through the whole podcast revolution, so to speak.
On quick question number 4, you've already answered it. I'm going to suggest Bill's book, Edible Heirlooms. I'm going to put a link. Timber Press, good friend of the show. We love Timber Press. Everybody who listens to anything to do with gardening should be checking out all the authors at Timber Press.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's my friend, but it really is the most beautiful book. I think I said his wife Susie did the illustrations, and I'm like you, I love the exotic, the interesting vegetables. The tomatoes I'm growing are all kind of unique this year. That one's really fun. Another book that I haven't mentioned that I love is, it's right on my desk here. It's called Your Farm in the City by Lisa Taylor and the Gardeners of Seattle Tilth. And Seattle Tilth is a wonderful Seattle Organic Gardening Association. And this book is so beautiful. And if you like to grow edibles or vegetables, I highly recommend it. It covers everything from, individual grow guides for leeks or beets to, various garden critters like carrot rust fly that might be a problem, to even how to blanch and freeze your vegetables. And let's see, is this also, I'm not sure who the publisher is. Oh, it's a Black Dog and Leventhal, actually printed in Canada. But yeah, it's a great book. I always recommend that to beginning gardeners.
Your Farm in the City by Lisa Taylor?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
Dynamite. Okay, look into your crystal ball. Question number 5, Erin.
All right.
What's the number one thing that every gardener should try to grow next year?
Well, wow.
And if you're stumped, what's the number one thing that you're going to try to grow next year?
What's the number one thing I'm going to try to grow? I think that I will be trying to grow some kohlrabi. I have never grown kohlrabi before, but I love to eat it. It's delicious and crispy. So I would suggest if people had something that they wanted to try, I would suggest kohlrabi.
Dynamite. Kohlrabi. Yeah. Good. Erin, our time is flying by. I want everyone check out Erin's blog at www.blackberryburrow.com. Follow her on Twitter at bbburrow. Remember, the power of social media is in sharing, so share her stuff. Erin, you've been a delightful guest. I'm actually going to give you the last word. Do you have a pearl of wisdom or a note of encouragement for our listeners today?
Yes. Have fun in your garden. That's the last thing I'd want to say. Have fun with your garden.
Dynamite. Erin, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to having you back talking about gardening real soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dave.
Hello, garden lover. It's Dave. Thanks to Erin. Great job. Great podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. All of the links, resources, and websites mentioned in this episode will be posted at www.backtomygarden.com/17. Have a great week.